Flow is an information consolidation platform which collates and contextualizes data from multiple data sources to provide you with a single version of the truth repository that your operational management team will use to make better quality decisions. Okay, so let's jump into that demo.
Hi guys, Lenny here from Flow Software. What I'm going to do today is just give you guys a little bit of a demo on the Flow configuration tool, as well as our visualization capability by means of the Flow web server for our dashboarding and reporting requirements. Now you'll notice I've got the configuration tool open in front of me, and on the left hand side of the tool is where I can go and build a model that represents the key information that I want to collect and report on from a Flow perspective. Notice I've got a little bit of a factory here, and I've got two filling lines, filler 1 and filler 2. And if I expand my model, I can see exactly what is the individual KPIs or measures that I want to report on these filling machines. Now I can also extend my model to go and look at the total utilities that I'm utilizing. In this case, I'm interested in total steam production, gas, as well as water consumption of my plant. It's very easy to go and extend the model by simply either right-clicking on a folder. I can add additional nodes to my tree, or I can use the icons in the flow zone here, drag them onto the existing nodes to expand them. In this case, I'm going to go and create a boiler section here, and I'm going to go and add a metric that's going to look at my boiler production as a key KPI point. On the right hand side of the configuration tool is where I have my information model. Now this is where I can go and create reports and dashboards and gain access or grant access to specific people in the organization that needs to view them. In this case, you'll notice that I've got an engineering section. I also have a production section, and I can go by means of security specify which users are available to see these reports. I can expand the reports to go and create a little bit of a folder structure in here until I get to the individual dashboards that I want to go and configure. But a little bit later in the demo, I'll show you guys how to configure and create these dashboards. Now, before we go and connect Flow to a whole bunch of data sources to actually go and create our KPIs and measures, we need to tell Flow one very important thing. The base of Flow is to create what we call time buckets, and we'll utilize these time buckets to create KPIs and aggregated measures, potentially for shifts, for days, for weeks, for months. So obviously we need to tell Flow what is my calendar settings or my time context that I want to utilize in this regard. So I go to my little toolbox icon here, and you'll notice in the toolbox I've got what we call our calendar section. Now I've already created a calendar here for my production environment, and when I open it up, you'll notice that I can say, okay, which month does my year start on? Which day does my week start on? And obviously, what hour does the day commence from a production perspective? Now, we can add more than one calendar to our Flow system. Think about an example where a financial calendar might run from a July to an August perspective, where, as we saw in the example, my production calendar runs from a January to December. So obviously, my year-to-date aggregations will yield two different results by the means of those two calendars. For each and every calendar, I can also then go and configure a shift pattern. In this case, I've got a very simple 3-shift pattern for a morning shift, afternoon shift, and a night shift, and I can go and configure these shift patterns by means of drag and drop the different shifts into these different time allocations. So when we're happy about our shift pattern, we're happy about the calendars that we've configured, now we can actually go and connect to data sources to pull the data in and to create our KPIs and calculations. Now, Flow can connect to data sources, either being time series historian data sources, or we can connect to more traditional kind of transactional databases like LIMS or an MES database as an example. You'll notice I've got the integration section here, and under my integration section I've got data sources and consumers. Data sources will be sources of data for Flow that we will query and then apply the aggregation or calculation that you've configured on top of that data. Where consumers will be other software vendors or potentially other software products that would need the data out of the Flow system. In this case, we're going to connect to some data sources, and notice that I've got a few examples already created. Now if I right click on the data source folder, I can go and create new data sources, either to connect to potentially a Canary historian, an inductive automation historian. From Microsoft, we can connect to SQL databases or Excel workbooks. We can connect to an Oracle database. From Wonderware, we can connect to the Wonderware historian as well as the Wonderware online historian. And if there's a cloud service that we need to connect to, we can utilize our web service in that regard. We also have an OPC HDA connector to connect to historians that has the OPC HDA protocol enabled. Now that gives us the opportunity to connect to a whole bunch of other historians like a GE, a Rockwell, and a Siemens historian in that regard. I've created a little historian here with some simulated data, and you'll notice that when I select that historian, that we will go and query the namespace for the tags as it has been configured in that historian. So we've got very good understanding, and we've got very tight integration to these different plant historians that we've got out in the industrial environment. You'll notice I've got a utility section, and under my utility section I can drill down until I get to the individual tags that's been configured inside of that historian. In this case, I've got 3 tags that represent my boiler. I've got a flow transmitter that tells me how much steam does this boiler produce, a pressure transmitter for the pressure inside of the boiler, as well as a temperature transmitter for the temperature. Now if I double click on any one of these raw tags in the historian, what Flow will do is it will create a little pseudo trend for me. Now I can change the date range to query the historian just to give me an idea of what is the data look that I'm actually playing with. Flow never ever stores or replicates this raw data. It is purely there for you to help you with your engineering. First of all, to make sure that you've got connection to that historian, and to make sure that you apply the correct aggregation method on top of that data. In this case, you can see a very simple raw flow transmitter values that's been stored in my historian. Now to create a measure or a KPI point for my steam production, I literally take the raw tag as it is in the historian and drag it across underneath my boiler production metric. What this will do is Flow will create by default an average hourly aggregation on top of this data. You'll notice at the top that I've got what we call our default section, and we use these default settings to determine what type of default measure we should create. If I open up this metric or this measure, you'll notice that the description as well as the units is already filled in. So what Flow will do is, if it is configured inside of the historian, Flow will bring that through and auto-populate the fields if it can find them already configured in the historian. If we expand the retrieval side, this is now where we can set the settings to say what is the actual aggregation type that we need to apply on top of this data. By default, Flow will select an average for you, but by means of the drop down, you can select either to give you the minimum, the maximum, potentially a count, time and state, or a standard deviation on the data. And if there's an aggregation style that doesn't meet your requirements, you can go and configure a custom expression to build in your own aggregation method. What Flow also does is allow us to give us a scaling factor input as well as a filter tag to filter out any potential noise. Now in this case, if we look at this example, my raw tag stored in the historian is configured to give me kilograms per second. Now if I'm interested to know what is the actual tons per hour, I can utilize the scaling factor configuration to go and convert kilograms per second to tons per hour. Very important then is obviously to change your unit of measure to tons per hour rather than the kilogram per second. When you're happy with your retrieval configuration, you can go and hit the little green deploy button, and what that will do is it will tell the Flow engine in the background to start querying the data, the historical data in the historian, apply this aggregation method on top of it, and store the result inside of the Flow database. Now you'll notice that we've got this concept of what we call backfill. So that is pretty useful if you have already captured a lot of historical data inside of your historian data source. Flow can go back in time, query the raw data in the historian, and apply the aggregation method upon that data, so you've got an historical starting point to start creating reporting and dashboarding on historical data. If we look at this little graph icon here, I can see what the status is of the Flow engine. So if I refresh that, you'll notice that the flow engine has catched up with the current date and time, and it processed all the historical records and applied the average aggregation on top of it. I can pop this out to also show it in that little trend environment, and if I trend that in relation to the raw data, I can see what the aggregation method that we've selected actually returned by means of the flow engine. So you'll notice the actual averages that was computed by looking at the raw data. So that was pretty simple. I've got a total steam production for the hour, but what if I want to know what is the total steam potentially for the shift to date or the day to date? Now you'll notice I've got these icons here in the middle in the flow zone, and you'll notice that we've got our hourly icon, our shiftly icon, and our daily icon. Now to create a shift to date aggregated measure, it's pretty simple. I take my current hourly retrieved steam production, and if I drag it onto the hourly icon again, what Flow will do is it will automatically create a shift to date aggregation. If I drag it again, it realizes that the next time interval is a day, so it will create a day to date. And if I drag it again, it will create a week to date, and we can continue until we get to a yearly aggregation. If I would like to know what is the current steam production for the day, I can go and drag the hourly icon on top of my daily icon, and that will create a daily steam production aggregation method. Now it's very important to notice that Flow will not hit the raw data source again to apply this aggregation. But what we will do is we will utilize the hour steam production that's already been captured inside of the Flow database, and we'll query our own database to actually go and perform the shift to date, day to date, week to date totals, as well as the daily total. I can go and deploy this all out by hitting a deploy on my metric level, and it will deploy all the aggregation or roll up aggregations for me. Now I can do exactly the same for my pressure and my temperature, and I can very quickly go and create temperature and pressure KPI points. Deploy them out, and the Flow engine will go and backfill the data and create these hourly time buckets for my pressure and my temperature. But what I'm actually interested in is to know, well, that's great. I know what the total steam production for the hour is, but how efficient is my boiler actually doing that? Now what we can do in Flow is we can add a manual entered measure to the equation. Up until now, I've dragged my raw tags from a historian data source, so it's automatically captured the data from that historian. But if I utilize the Flow zone icons, I can go and create an hourly manual entered data point. In this case, I'm going to go and add the rating of my boiler as a type of a constant that I can use in calculations. So when I bought this boiler from the sales representative, I was promised a certain steam production, typically called the nameplate rating of this piece of equipment. And I'm just going to go and configure that as an initial value for this manually entered data point. In this case, I was promised that this boiler can produce 13.5 tons per hour. Deploy that out, and it will create those hourly time buckets with this constant value. Now what I can do is I can actually do a very simple efficiency calculation. I've got the raw actual value as well as the rating. So I can go and create an efficiency calc that says take the actual value divided by the raw, and I should get an efficiency value. Now you'll notice right at the bottom of the flow zone is where I have this little calculator icon. So if I take my actual steam production, drag it onto the calculator icon, it will create a calculated measure for me. In this case, it will be my efficiency calculation for my boiler. Open that up, and under the retrieval section, I now have the capability to go and create a custom calculation. Now I've already got the actual steam production in here. What I can do is I can add the rating to the calculation as well. And to create this calculation, it's plain and simple. Take the actual value divided by the rating and multiply that by 100. That will give me a percentage of the actual efficiency of this boiler. Obviously, I need to change my unit of measure to represent a percentage. Validate the calculation to make sure that I did not make any mistakes, like spelling mistakes. And when your calculation is validated, you can hit the green deploy button, and the flow engine will go and create and execute this calculation. Now I've typed out this calculation by hand, but what I could have done is as well as create a user-defined function if I have to go and apply this same efficiency calculation to a whole bunch of assets that I've got on my production floor. If I go back to my little toolbox icon here, where I configured the calendar information, you'll notice that I've got the opportunity to go and create functions. Now we have a whole bunch of standard functions already available, but we could go and create what we call user-defined functions, and you'll notice that I've created a little user-defined function called efficiency. If I open this up, you'll notice that I can go and create a user-defined function very similar to C# notation, and I can utilize this function in how many ever assets that I need to go and determine efficiency for. In this example, I'm just going to leave it to my calculation that I've configured, and I'm going to deploy it out so that the flow engine can go and do its job. Up until now, I've created everything manually within Flow. What I meant by that is that I went to my data source, browsed for the tag, and I manually went and created this boiler icon. But what if you have more than one boiler and you really want to do this very quickly? What we've got in Flow is the concept now of a template. And in this case, I go to my little template icon here, and you'll notice that I've got a set of engineering templates. And if I expand that, you'll notice that I've already created a template for my boiler, all the individual reporting points that I might require. So if I need to instantiate another boiler on my plant, I can simply go and drag the boiler folder underneath my steam section here, call this boiler 2, and it will go and mass instantiate all the KPI points. I can drag it again to potentially create another boiler, and it will do the exact same thing. Notice the color is now a little bit of a different color that we utilize, a little bit of a green color here for the icons, and all that means is that it is actually instantiated from a template. Now the only thing that's left for me to do is to actually map the points that I need to retrieve from my historian to the correct historian tags. Now I can simply do that by again going back to my data source, select the correct tag, and by doing a shift drag operation, I can go and map my pressure to my pressure retrieval, drag the steam to the actual steam retrieval that I have, as well as the temperature to the temperature point. And when I've done that, I've actually mapped this instance. I can deploy it out, and it will go and create these measuring points for me. So you'll notice that with the template functionality, I can go and really quickly give value to my clients. Now, what we will do from a flow side is what the templates give us is the functionality to potentially provide you guys with out-of-the-box templates for different verticals in our industry, and you would be able to use these vertical templates to quickly show value to clients potentially in the water and wastewater, food and bev, and mining verticals. I'm done creating my boiler KPI point. I can see what the actual efficiency was that was calculated by the flow server and by my efficiency calculation. But this is not the actual front end that we're going to give potentially to an operator to obviously see and make decisions on his boiler efficiency. So the next thing that we're going to do is actually create a little report on top of the data that we've just configured. So I'm going to go back to my reporting model, and underneath my engineering section I've got a boiler reporting point already set up, and I'm going to go and create a boiler dashboard. Double click the boiler dashboard, and what it will do is it will create me a blank canvas where I can now go and create whatever type reporting type I need to go and visually display my data in. So if I right click on any blank section, it will give me the opportunity to either add an event-based table, a scatter chart, some default text, a time-based chart, time-based table. I can even embed a web page, potentially from a SCADA or a manufacturer's website, inside of my dashboard as well. And I can go and configure some widgets to my dashboard. Let's do a very simple time-based table. In this case, I'm going to do an hourly table. I can go and drag the table around on my dashboard canvas, and I can go and resize it to determine how much of the dashboard does this specific reporting point going to take up. Double click on the time-based table, and it's going to give me now a whole bunch of options to go and configure the table. So I can go and configure the title. I can give it some color, some background color, make the font italic and bold. I can specify how long back do I want the dates in the report to be. So in this case, I can go and query for the last 2 days worth of data. And in the indicator section, I can say, do I want by default to show the quality component from potentially suspect data from my historian, or any comments or versions that have changed in the data. Underneath the header section, I can specify what different row headers do I want to add. In this case, I'm going to add some unit of measures and some sparkline to my report, as well as some column headers. Now currently my columns are segregated by the hour, but I can add a partition to say just show me the weeks as well. And for the hour, please go and add these extensions or roll-ups that I've configured to show me my shift to date, day to date, and week to date numbers inside of my report. In the section option here is now where I can go and say which measures do I want to report on, and I can simply take the entire boiler metric, drag it into the section area here, and it will go and add all the hourly time intervals to my report. Underneath each and every one of these measures, I can then go and still configure each individual one of them. I can configure the font of each individual measure. Do I want to show a spark line? Do I want to add a limit? Do I want to add context? Do I want to add the actual shift and day aggregations? So in this case, yes, I would like to show my shift to date, day to date, and week to date numbers in my report as well. And in essence, that's all I need to configure to get my data in a report. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch to the web front end of Flow. And when I open up my browser, hidden the host and the port that the web server is serving, I'll be presented by this splash screen. Now, very important, I need to log into the Flow web server so that I can see the reports that are assigned to me, as well as the ability to add any comments and add data to the manual forms. So I'm going to sign in here with my domain credentials. You notice I'm signed in. It will show you your initials in the little sign in option there. And now I can go and browse my index. Now you'll notice the index mimics the information model that we've configured in the config tool. So it's quite important to structure that in a sensible way for people to find their reporting. In this case, I've created that little boiler dashboard. Click on that and it will go and show me the data in a very simple tabular form with the little spark lines that I've configured, as well as right at the end I can see my shift to date, day to date, and week to date values. So this is quite easy. I didn't have to do anything else than dragging and dropping a few items on my dashboard, and I've got a very good report out of here. But let's look a little bit at the numbers. So remember, we created this efficiency calculation for my boiler. Now, in all honesty, if you look at all of these numbers displayed on the screen, can you tell me that this boiler is actually running efficient or not? Well, it's a little bit difficult because I need to read each and every value and in my mind try and determine what does it mean if my boiler runs 98%. So it's not very good from visualization data by just throwing up a whole bunch of numbers on the screen. So what we can do from a flow perspective is we can do two things. We can either apply a heat map concept to our data, or we can add what we call limit exceptions to the data as well. So let's do limit exceptions first. I'm going to go back to my efficiency calculation that I've configured. And on my efficiency calculation, you'll notice that I've got a little limits section in the config tool. Now I've already configured a plant-wide limits section to determine what my limit colors should be. So you'll notice in my toolbox section here, I've already got that plant-wide configuration. Drag that across to my production calendar, and now I can get the opportunity to add a low limit to my reporting point. In this case, I would like to know every time that my boiler is running below 95 efficiency to highlight that for me potentially in a report. Now remember that we've backfilled the data to historical data sitting in our historians. Now if I want to apply this limit exception on the historical data, I can simply go and backfill this limit onto there. You don't have to, but what that will happen is only from this day going forward will Flow go and evaluate this limit exception. That's pretty much it from a configuration point of view on the actual measure itself. The only thing that we need to do now is I need to go back to my table and add the limit to my efficiency point here. So I can go and say, please go and show me that plant limit, and please change the color of the individual cells to whatever is set in my plant-wide limit provider. If I refresh my report, I should get that limit exception being showed on my table report. And now I can very easily see when there was a limit exception, or when my boiler was actually running underneath that 95% limit. So that's the one concept, that we can format data to make it more appealing or quicker to see where problems is. The other concept that we can add is what we call a heat map. So let's add a heat map on my actual steam production. So on my actual steam production, I can go and add what we call a measure color provider. In this case, I'm going to look at myself, and I'm going to say when my actual steam production is low, please make the value red. And when my steam production is high, please change the value to low. Now you can set Flow to automatically look the min and the max values in the data range that's in the report, or you can specify a low and a high value to format the data. In this case, I'm going to let Flow do that, and I'm going to go and refresh my data in my report. Now what you will notice is it will go and apply what we call a heat mapping function on my actual steam production, and it's very simple now to see where my steam production was low and where it was high. Notice the same place where my efficiency was bad, obviously my steam production is also red, showing me the actual individual problem. Now at any point in time, I can click on any value inside of Flow, and what it will do is it will open up a section here for me to add comments. Now I am currently logged in with my username, so I've got the ability to add comments to specify why a specific value or calculation is low and close the loop from an information decision support system. So I can potentially do an investigation, and I could say that the coal that was utilized in this boiler, the quality of that coal was bad. Every time people now look at this value or this point, they can see the comments that I've added. Notice that it adds me as the user that entered in the data. I can also look at the details for this. Now, because I selected a calculation, Flow gives me the opportunity to drill down into that calc. So it shows me the actual calculation that was utilized to get to the desired result. It also shows me the raw values that was used to determine the calculation. In this case, the actual steam production for that hour, as well as the rating for the boiler for that hour. Now I can drill in even further, and it will give me the actual raw value that was retrieved from the data source. If I look at the history, I can see the actual version of this calculation. So if someone did change potentially the rating or the value that was collected from the data source, we will create a new version it up, and keep the historical audit trail of all the versions that this calculation go through in its lifetime, which makes it quite cool to fault find and to see where your calculation might have an issue, or where someone actually entered different data. Now let's do exactly that. Great thing about Flow is the capability to also add data manually into the Flow system, and we do that by the means of creating forms. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my configuration tool, and I'm going to create a manually captured form. Now forms can be used for two things. Can be used to correct data potentially sourced from data sources, as well as manually changing data or entering data into the system. Notice that I've created a little boiler form, and I've got two tabs here for my two boilers, and I can go and add my boiler production into these different tabs. So I'm going to add that to boiler 1, and it will add all the points here into the form. Now if I refresh my dashboard here, what I would be able to do is now access the form. I'm already logged in from a security perspective, so I should be able to go and browse the form section, and underneath boiler be able to access my boiler form. Now notice two things. We've got two tabs at the top, so we try and mimic Excel sheets, because that's what people are used to capture manual data on plant environments. Even if I go and select a cell, if you select tab, we will go to the cell next to it. If we go enter, we'll go to the cell below it. So we'll utilize the kind of functionality that you're used to from an Excel perspective. Now in this case, let's look at the rating. Let's say someone increased the rating of this boiler by increasing the capacity. We can go and increase the rating of the boiler now potentially to 15 tons per hour, and we can do that by the means of our manually entered data. And from now on forward, Flow will utilize this 15 as the new value for our rating. Now if I go back to my little report that I've built regarding the boiler, you'll notice that if I go right at the end, that the rating has now increased to 15. What would have happened in the background is obviously because my rating increased, my efficiency calculations should have recompiled taking this new 15 rating into account. So if I select this value, go into the history of that, you'll notice that indeed we versioned it up and we've created a new version showing the new value of this calculation. And if I click on the details section, you'll notice that we use this new 15 in the calculation. I can also go and add a timestamp, so I can look at yesterday's data. I can also go and export this report as an image or as a PDF. Now this is just a little bit of an example of how easy it is to quickly create a little bit of a table report. I've created a little bit of a more elaborate dashboard a little bit earlier, just to give you guys a look and feel of the type of composite dashboards that we can create inside of the flow system. So I've got my tabular report here with some different colors and ways to display it in my spark lines, but also applying this heat map and limit exception concept of the tabular data. I've got 2 efficiency widgets here, as well as 2 column widgets showing me my current production figures of how much bottles do I actually produce out of my filling lines. I've got 2 charts at the bottom. The first one is a stacked column chart where I can stack my good production with my bad production, so that you can very quickly visually see where your bad production is potentially overshooting your good production. On the right hand side, I've got an OEE graph showing you your quality component versus the actual good product that you're producing. And notice that we can have multiple axes. In this case, I've got an axis for my total bottle count as well as for my quality component on the same charting capability. Again, as I explained, we can export this as an image and a PDF. And if I want to compare this to yesterday's data, I can simply go and change the date timestamp, hit the apply button, and it will apply yesterday's data and show that for me in the same report. And if I click on the reset button, it will go and reset the data back to today's values. Now at any point in time, if I want to go and do a further investigation on potentially one of the report sections, I can go and pop that out into its own web browser. In this case, I've got my table report here, and in the example of a table report, we can also go and export that table report as a CSV file. I can go now and add a start and an end date to this data, and I can decide to show either where comments were added as well as the quality component of that data. What that will do is it will show me potentially where the historian has sourced data that is bad from a quality perspective. It will go and source that and show that on my report. And that is it for my short demo on how to configure and get your flow system up and running. You can also go and look on our YouTube channel page for videos regarding notifications to potentially send this type of dashboard as an email, or utilizing our Flow mobile notification solution, as well as our new integration services to push the data out to potentially other databases, ERP systems, and even back to the operator floor by means of a more real-time protocol like MQTT or OPC.